So hello and welcome. For those that don't know me, I'm Sarah Buckley. I'm the Chief of Staff for Carol Schwartz and the CEO of the Truella Foundation. And I'd like to warmly welcome all of the Pathways to Politics community here this evening for our first 2021 event. We've got a fantastic turnout of Pathways alumni, program staff, speakers and presenters, and broader supporters of our work. So as we gather for this event virtually, let us take a moment just to reflect on the various traditional lands on which we are placed. And I'd like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people where I'm based and pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging. During an extraordinary and challenging time for women in politics, we're so thrilled to have former Labor MP Kate Ellis here tonight in conversation with Carol. Kate's book, Sex, Lies and Question Time, which some of you hopefully have read, has just been released, a timely exploration of the good, the bad and the ugly of life as a woman in Australian politics. And there's also been an incredible recent Australian story covering Kate's experiences and time writing the book, so I highly recommend you watch that too. Before I hand over to Carol for what will no doubt be a riveting in-conversation with Kate, there's a few things I wanted to share. So firstly, to acknowledge our co-hosts for this evening's event, the University of Melbourne. They've been such a fantastic founding partner of Pathways. Applications are currently open for the Victorian program and there's already strong interest, so please do think about who you could tap on the shoulder and encourage to apply, because referrals from this Pathways community is often the way we find the most amazing applicants. QUT and UNSW have both just closed for applications in Queensland and New South Wales, and their selection processes are underway. And indeed, I was part of that process for Queensland today, and it was just fantastic to see the quality of the cohort that were being attracted to the program. It's just very exciting that we now have Pathways being rolled out in 3 states this year. It's a significant milestone for the program, and over time that the intention is that we'll offer it in all states. We're also piloting a separate one-day Politics in Colour online workshop in May to continue to strengthen the pipeline of diverse candidates across the 3 states, particularly Indigenous women. So more details will be sent out shortly to share with your networks. Our Pathways mentoring pilot is going really well, and we've been delighted by the feedback so far from our mentors, who are current and former politicians. A common theme has been the level of talent, how impressive and self-aware the mentees are, and how much the mentors are also gaining from the experience. And so later this year, we'll open another round of the mentoring program, and we hope that many of the alumni here tonight will take up that opportunity. We've also been reflecting on the unique multi-partisan Pathways community that we have, and how could we better utilise that for impact? It feels both timely and important to establish some kind of united public voice so that we can collectively call for the changes needed in our parliaments. So we've started exploring the creation of a multi-partisan Pathways Alumni Council that would identify a small number of priority issues to collectively focus on for the year and to advocate for change. So we welcome your thoughts on this, and we'll shortly be establishing an alumnus working group to develop and test the approach.
Thanks so much, Sarah, and welcome everyone, and particularly welcome to you, Kate, and thank you so much for joining us tonight, and congratulations on your book. It's a fantastic piece of writing, and it's incredibly timely. I don't know whether you timed it for this time, but wow, it couldn't have been launched at a better time. And of course, you know, it's coincided with an enormous media and public backlash, which is demanding systemic change in our parliaments. So the work is vitally important to everyone, obviously, involved with Pathways to Politics, because we want women in Parliament, in governments, at all levels, to not only be safe, but to feel supported and thrive. And this, of course, is going to be one of our alumni conversations we plan to hold during 2021 as we explore the challenges and the opportunities for women in politics. Now, before we leap into the conversation, I'd like to briefly, a little bit more formally introduce Kate, because she's a woman of great achievement. So she was 27 when she was first elected and represented Adelaide in the Australian House of Representatives for Labor from 2004 till 2019. 15 years, it's a long time. She served in multiple portfolios in the outer ministry of the 2007 to 13 federal Labor government. After the 2007 election, Kate became the Minister for Youth and Minister for Sport. This made her the youngest person to become an Australian government minister, a record until then held by former Prime Minister Paul Keating. During her time in office, Kate was also Minister for Early Childhood Education, Childcare and Youth, Minister for Employment Participation, and Minister for the Status of Women. From 2013, Kate was in shadow cabinet until she left Parliament at the 2019 federal election, when she announced she would be stepping down to spend more time with her family. Now, Kate's new book, which has a fantastic title, Sex, Lies and Question Time, explores her own experiences from 15 years in Parliament and interviews a range of other women from across the political spectrum. Kate reveals a frank, confronting picture, exploring issues including sexism, motherhood, appearances, social media, the sisterhood, and of course, sex. Kate, my first question, as I said before, what extraordinary timing to launch a book like this. You've really captured the zeitgeist in a really compelling and I guess really importantly for Pathways, a really multi-partisan way. Did you ever imagine that this would be the environment that you would be publishing in and launching your book in?
Well, good evening, Carol, and hello to all the lovely little faces I can see on my screen. Short answer, no. When I spent most of last year writing this book, I thought that people would think it might be a bit controversial to suggest that there may be a cultural problem in Parliament when it came to women. And as it turned out, that had been well established before the book was released. So it's been interesting because I can't count how many people have said great timing. And every time someone said that, I felt a bit of guilt about that, actually, because obviously I would rather sell many less books and have Brittany Higgins not have gone through the experience she's gone through. And so I felt this sense of guilt that I didn't want to capitalise or look like I was capitalising on other people's trauma. But it's just a coincidence. And I guess the way I look at it is if we can use that to keep momentum going, to keep building the case for change, then I guess that's the positive thing.
Yeah. In the opening pages of your book, you say, and I'm quoting you here, "I will never again hold a job that is as rewarding, interesting and inspiring as being a federal MP. I don't want a generation of women turned away from that opportunity." And you also quote Tanya Plibersek saying, "It's utterly worth it. I would put up with 10 times as much shit if I had to." Tell us a bit more about your thinking about this and how women can weigh it all up.
Well, the thing is, I wasn't writing this book because I'm bitter. I'm not. I didn't go out in some scandal or controversy, and I had 15 years of an amazing job where, if you care about helping people, there's no way you can help more people than as a federal minister, short of curing cancer or the like. It's extraordinary the change that you can bring about, and it's incredibly rewarding. So one of the thing that I found hardest when I was writing this book is, I guess, trying to balance that. I didn't want to turn more women off, but also I did think that we need to shine a light on some of the practices and some of the treatment that isn't okay and shouldn't continue for the next generation. So I found that a really hard balancing act. I think I said in the introduction, there's this thing that it's almost like when women say you shouldn't tell women who haven't had children about the realities of childbirth, as if that's going to turn them off. And I felt like there's a similar sense that there was this kind of silence about, we don't want to turn women off, so we want to encourage you to get involved, to stick your hand up and get here. So maybe we won't dwell on some of the negatives, but they're never going to change unless we do. And that's the point that I came to in the end, that it is a great job. I would absolutely encourage women who are interested and passionate about politics and about policy to put up their hands, but also I want it to be better for you.
Yeah, that's great. And why do you think that it takes women to leave politics before they actually talk about the issues that they've had to deal with? Well, why is that?
Well, I think there's a few factors. I think one of them is that you're too busy and you've got much more important issues to focus on than yourself and the way that you're being treated. So that's one reason. But also, people might find this hard to believe, but when I got into politics, I just thought that's the way the world worked. And to be honest, it probably was 20 years ago. But it wasn't until I left that it was kind of this awakening where I saw that the rest of the world doesn't work like that anymore, that Australia has modernised, that businesses have changed their practices, have focused on culture and cultural change, and that the Parliament's been left behind. So it actually wasn't until I got out and, I'd be sitting around a board table and I'd go, hang on a second, this is nice. People are listening to each other. They're not abusing each other. They're not undermining each other. Everyone's trying to work together for the best outcomes. This is quite novel. And I guess the more that I was out, the more I saw, I guess, how outdated the culture of Parliament is. That I just didn't realise that it was so different to the rest of modern Australia when I was there.
That's so interesting because at one stage you talk about Sarah Hanson-Young and what she had to deal with, and that basically you didn't get involved in that, and that in fact you say that Simon Birmingham sort of checked in with her and said, how are you feeling? And you felt a little bit guilty when you looked back on that. Surely the women who are dealing with this rubbish must have gotten together and discussed it at some stage and said, this is appalling. We're just not going to deal with this behaviour. Why don't we do something about it? Why wasn't that conversation ever had?
I think there's a few reasons. I think that one is it can be really humiliating. You don't want to go to your colleagues and say, do you know who thinks that I'm sleeping with half of Australia? Do you know who thinks that I am an airhead who doesn't belong here? But the other thing is there's a reason why people weaponise sexual rumours, and it's because you can spread them around, you can background, but it's very unlikely that people who hear them are going to approach the person who the rumour's about, because you don't know if it's true or not. That people didn't come up to me and say, oh, just so you know, there's a rumour that you're having a sordid sex triangle within your office when you're meant to be concentrating on policy work, because they don't know if it's true or not. So it stays in whispers in the corridor, and often the person who is at the centre of it doesn't even hear about it at all. So you can't have a conversation about that. It wasn't until... So in my case, that was one of the rumours that was spread about me, and it wasn't until years later that I would speak to some of my colleagues when someone would try and tell me a rumour about someone else. I'd say, oh, well, do you know what once got spread about me? They were saying that there was a love triangle in my office, and every single person I said that to went, oh, yeah, we heard about that. You just don't discuss it with each other. I mean, I guess in their defence, it would be pretty embarrassing if I turned around and said, yeah, that's true, but, each to our own. This is the reason that they pick these weapons, because they don't get exposed.
Your book highlights the appalling misogynistic attitudes of various men in Parliament and their deep sense of entitlement. It really just fills me with rage. And in fact, you know, I was watching an old episode of Q&A with you, and you had been asked a question, and Lindsay Tanner and Christopher Pine were on the panel with you, and you started trying to answer the question, and they both just completely spoke over you in some inane banter that they had on. And I saw your face, and you just thought, what in the hell is happening here? And I'm not even going to dignify this situation by attempting to speak. It seems that seems to happen quite a lot to women, and there don't seem to be consequences for the behaviours of the men. We know that this can't be fixed with empathy training. So what do you think needs to happen?
I think there need to be consequences, and I think that the reality is that the Parliament's probably not going to apply those consequences themselves. The Australian public needs to. The Australian public needs to demand better standards, is my view. I think one of the things that was interesting was I spoke to 16 different women, current MPs or past MPs, and every single one of them had a story to tell about how they'd been treated differently because they were a woman. And some of those were things that women in all sorts of different industries would relate to. You know, being spoken over in meetings, coming up with an idea and nobody really taking it on board, and then a bloke saying the same idea 5 minutes later and everyone tells him what a genius he is and gets excited about it all. You know, not being able to show your anger, men being able to raise their voices, but women being deemed as hysterical if they do that. There were examples of that. But the reason I wanted to write the book was because I thought that there were a range of other, I guess, tools that were used against women in politics, which are pretty unique to our Parliament. And I think that, I mean, using the media to try and spread sexual rumours, for example, I don't understand why a consequence of sticking your hand up and saying you want to work for a better Australia should be risking having your reputation smeared publicly in the media with allegations of, you know, false rumours about what you've been doing in your sex life. So there's a whole lot of things that I guess were kind of unique to the women in politics, and that's what I thought it was important to shine a light on and try and expose. You know, what's the answer? We elect better men, elect more women and elect better men and hold them to account. And the Australian public, you know, I think it's really interesting that in the last few weeks, the Australian public have been more outraged than the Parliament has about some of the behaviours that have been coming forward. Mm-hmm. And that's a really good thing, because if we expose it, if we shine a light on it, then I think it's up to the Australian public to put in place consequences at the ballot box.
And do you think that's going to happen, or do you think that the public are absolutely just disgusted and think, you know, I just don't want to have anything to do with this, and it's just politicians playing politics in Canberra where they're living in a complete bubble, and, you know, I'm just going to completely disengage?
I think it varies a little bit. I read this really interesting article the other day about when you know that a political issue is biting is when it passes from the political debate into the mainstream debate. And Peter Lewis wrote a piece saying he knew that John Howard was in trouble when Work Choices was turned into a joke on Kath and Kim. And anyone who saw the Gogglebox reaction to Scott Morrison's handling of particularly Brittany Higgins, but some of these other women's issues, saw that I think that it has passed into mainstream Australia, but the polling seems to suggest that that's only true when it comes to women. And what's really interesting is it doesn't seem to be affecting the government when it comes to men's approval ratings at all. So
yeah.
I think it is real for a lot of people. There are a lot of people I know who don't care about politics, who aren't members of political parties, who certainly don't tune in and watch Question Time, but it has struck a chord with them as women, that they know their lived experience, they know what they've gone through, and they know how they would like a government to respond to that. And that they feel that it's something personal when the government isn't taking seriously enough issues of sexual assault, for example. I think that's definitely cut through.
And how powerful and persuasive do you think the women's vote is?
Well, I guess we'll find out in about 12 months' time. I do think that we are at the start of a wave. This isn't going away anytime soon, and it's not party political. I think it is about sending a message to everyone in Parliament that, to quote the March for Justice, enough is enough, and that women want to be at the table, want their issues to be addressed properly, and want them to be prioritised. And I think that there is a wave that is building and building, and it will be women sticking up their hand to get elected, but it will also be women voting for parties that have proper policies and prioritise their issues.
I agree that it's not party political, and in Pathways to Politics, we often discuss what would politics look like if there was a critical mass of women in Parliament, i.e., for us, a critical mass is, of course, 50%, which represent us as a society. Do you think that would give women of all parties the strength and also the ability to form like an inter-party women's caucus, so that issues could be dealt with as women politicians rather than women of different political ideologies?
I think that our party loyalty and party structures are too entrenched. I think that, like, electing more women, will that see change? Absolutely. I know that because I saw it. I saw what it was like in 2004, and then I saw what it was like 15 years later when, there'd been structural changes introduced, and all of a sudden there was this army of women surrounding me. It changed the culture. And it didn't just change the culture because you've got a critical mass, because you've got support. It also changed the culture amongst the men who were getting elected when they stuck up their hand and they were elected standing on a party platform that prioritised gender equality, knowing that there were affirmative action rules in place. It really changed the culture. But I know that a lot of people say, why can't the women all just get together? Why can't you just get together, work together and make it better? And I think that underestimates the complexities of what women are in Parliament for. I don't know anyone who stuck up their hand and said, I want to go into Parliament to make it better for the female MPs that are in there. People go in because they want to fight to improve our health system, or to give children a better start to life, or whatever it might be. The issues that people put up their hand and agree to go to the public and ask for election for are often much bigger and harder fought issues. And so I know for me, for example, early childhood is one of my passions. And one of the big debates we had in the Parliament was a move that would cut the access to quality early childhood programs for some of the most vulnerable children in Australia, cut the number of hours access they had, and ensure that they had less time in a safe environment and more time where they were placed at risk. Now, I would fight for that, and I would fight for those children, and that would be more important to me than seeing if my female opponent was having a bad day or if people were being unkind to her. So I know the answer you want to hear, but that's the reality, I think, of party loyalty.
Sure. But the way you get, I guess, the issue of childcare up on the agenda, and the way you get, support from the Parliament, from the other side of politics, is, as we've experienced, is childcare seems to be way down the list when the men are in control, but when you get more women on both sides of politics or on all sides of politics, childcare obviously has a completely different standing. So isn't that one of the advantages of being able to negotiate with your colleagues, with your female colleagues, around getting certain issues prioritised, which otherwise wouldn't be prioritised?
Carol, I really want to give you the answer that I think you want to hear, but I can't on this. Like, I held, for example, the early childhood portfolio for probably 7 or 8 years. And for the majority of that time, whether it was in government or opposition, the minister or the shadow minister opposing me was a woman on the other side. That, part of the issue is the system and the way it's structured pits women to fight against other women. That they will send a woman to go and get stuck into a female minister more often than not. And it means that those relationships inevitably get really damaged. Now, there is a positive to all of this. When there are issues that come up, particular women's issues, access to abortion, for example. I was there when the RU486 debate took place in the Parliament when Tony Abbott was the health minister. And it was women from across the Parliament from all different parties who came together to work and to provide a way through to oppose the government of the day, the health minister of the day, basically putting a ban on that drug despite what the health advice might be. And that's an example. There have been other examples across the years, particularly when it comes to women's health issues or family law issues, particularly child support issues where women have come together across party lines. I think that that's really important on those issues. But I think it's also important to recognise that the reality of our party system means that on a normal day-to-day basis, many of the women in the Parliament will feel like they have more in common with the men that they sit alongside than the women that they sit opposite.
Yeah, and I've also heard that, they're always very wary of the men that they sit alongside because that's usually the person that they have to watch out for more than the person opposite. But isn't that because we've been sucked into playing the men's game? I mean, the fact is we live and work in Parliament in a world that was set up by men for men 200 years ago. And surely, the way we're going to start chipping away at that and actually doing politics differently is by having more women who start changing the culture and the way the game is played. Surely that's the way we do that.
Well, absolutely. And I think it's really important. There is an issue about a critical mass. Like, part of this is not about, for example, what happens in question time is decided each morning by a tactics committee. Now, if you had equal gender representation sitting on that tactics committee, then I imagine that there would be women who felt more supported and more confident to speak up and say that is an inappropriate line of attack and that, or I'm not asking that question, do your own dirty work if you want to. Yeah. And there is no doubt that when there is a critical mass, then people will find it much easier to make those statements. And I mean, just before we, I don't know what you call it, came on air, started Zooming, let everybody in, whatever you call it. We were having a conversation about, when Julia Gillard was Prime Minister, it was Julie Bishop who had to ask a lot of, I guess, the most personal questions about her boyfriend from 20 years previously. And, I don't think anyone thinks that that was Julie Bishop's idea. It was seen that they would put up a woman rather than have a man look like he was bullying the Prime Minister. So there is systemic pressures against women working together that only a critical mass of women and a changing of standards will address.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more. So there's a particular chapter in your book called The Sisterhood that I did find challenging and at times disappointing, and it sort of dovetails into what we've been talking about because it's the chapter explores the way women do or don't support each other within and across parties, and you actually outline support for a cross-party working group or Women's Caucus by Sarah Hanson-Young and Karen Andrews, but also include the negative views on whether that would work by Tanya Plibersek and Julie Bishop. And I guess you've somewhat covered that. But how do you think this could be facilitated? Is it only by a critical mass? I mean, are we anywhere near this happening?
I guess, firstly, I'm sorry to disappoint you. I think my editor was also like, you need to say something positive about how the sisterhood is going to come together and fix all of this. And I felt like I also needed to be honest about the way that those relationships work, that the women I spoke to, a lot of them felt that they were set up to compete with other women, not to support other women. Particularly women in minor parties felt like where there was a smaller number, that they were in direct competition, not with all of their fellow party members, but with the women that were there. That the media loves to set up conflict between women. You know, they love a so-called catfight. And so there are all these pressures pitting women against other women. And I guess to answer your question, Carol, I just have a view that, you know, if women want to come together and socialise more and support each other more, then that's great. But it isn't women that set up these structures. It wasn't women who set up these practices. It wasn't women who established this culture. So if we want to see change, how about we get the blokes to get together and talk about what they're going to do differently in the future? I just think that we didn't create this problem, and it's placing an unrealistic pressure on women to think that we're going to be the ones that are going to solve it. We need men to actually recognise that we need real reform. I think we need real reform of the way that our parliaments operate, and certainly of the standards and rules of engagement in our parliaments. So it was a really hard chapter to write because it's really complicated. There are a lot of different factors at play in the way that women, I guess, interrelate with other women within the parliament. But it was one of my favourite quotes in the whole book, where Tanya Plibersek talked about the fact that, you know, at the time that I was interviewing her, Pauline Hanson was the deputy chair of an inquiry into pushing to abolish the family law court. You know, there was evidence of the impact that this would have on children living in violent homes and women fleeing domestic violence. And so all this talk of, well, let's get the women to come together and have a tea and a coffee. Tanya's quote was, well, what are we going to do? Braid each other's hair and talk about boys? Like, there are big issues that we're debating at the moment. And, you know, that's the reality of the environment that we work in.
Yeah. Well, I couldn't agree with you more that, you know, men have to be standing shoulder to shoulder beside us, making sure that these changes happen. And in fact, initiating the changes, because you're 100% right. These are structures that have been set up by men for men. So, you know, Elizabeth Broderick has managed, I think, to make a great impact in the corporate world through Male Champions of Change movement. What do you think the chances are of Male Champions of Change movement amongst male parliamentarians?
I think it's really important. One thing that I've been really heartened by is I've had a number of male MPs, including quite senior male MPs from both the government and the opposition, who've contacted me since the book came out. And one said they're sorry that some of those experiences happened to me. But two have said that they had no idea. They had no idea about a whole lot of this stuff, and that they will be more aware of it going forward. And that's really important. And I really appreciated that, because it shows that they're going to have their eyes open to some of these things. And some of it is as simple as, you know, there's a woman who was on the other side of politics to me that I heard all sorts of sordid sexual rumours about. And every time someone put one to me, I would respond by saying, yeah, right, but do you know what they've said about me?
Yeah.
Whereas even if we're just talking about these things, if men start to realise, oh, okay, this might just be a tool being used to undermine that woman, I shouldn't pass it on, I'm not going to engage in that gossip, then that's progress. So I think we will see men's behaviour change, but yeah, we need champions for sure.
Yeah, what is this obsession with women's sexual behaviour? I mean, does the same conversation happen around men's sexual behaviours too?
No, not at all. And I think it's this is about the realities for women in our society, is that the age-old he's a stud, she's a slut still exists. And the reason people don't spread rumours about men's sexual behaviour is because it doesn't hurt them. Nobody judges their performance at their job as that being relevant. Whereas I think there's two different attacks which are used predominantly on women. One is of a sexual nature, and that's something that I certainly faced a lot of. And it's used to make you look flippant, to make you not look serious, to undermine your credibility. The other one, which I think is really safe for women, is, she's got mental health issues, she's a bit unstable. I never hear that about, I've never heard that about male colleagues, but it is something that seems to be used against women, I imagine more broadly than in the parliament, but that is something that continues. And so I think awareness of these, so that people can question, why is this information being spread, who gains from it, and what are the motives behind it, is really important.
Yeah, how fascinating. I didn't realise that mental health stability was actually a woman's issue. And maybe with what's happened to our ex-Attorney General and the other gentlemen, and the fact that they've had to take now mental health leave means that will no longer be the case.
Well, maybe, except, without going into the case in any details, I do note that in the issue of the ex-Attorney General, he can take mental health leave, and that's seen as a good and sensible thing to do. But the mental health status of his accuser is still regularly used against her. So I think that this is something that people treat men and women quite differently. Can I just say, going into politics is a really good idea. I realise I'm talking about all of the bad things. So I just wanted to assure you that there are also positive bits, and that it's well worth your while.
No, I have to say that is the message I think we get loud and clear. But I think the important thing is that we go into these sorts of roles with our eyes wide open, and therefore understand how we can be best supported, and what we're going to put up with and what we're not going to put up with, and how we can best change the system that we're moving ourselves into. And I think that, our Pathways to Politics alumni are amazing women who are courageous, who are have fabulous values, and who are idealistic about the changes that they can make. And it is, from my point of view, just absolutely crucial that we get these critical numbers, the critical mass of numbers in there, because I think that women will support other women. The way you describe the Tactics Committee, I think, is such a beautiful example of where we need equal numbers of men and women sitting around the table. I shouldn't hog all the question time, because I can see there are lots and lots of questions. So I might hand over now to Sarah Buckley to field the questions. And Kate, thank you so much for your openness and your frankness, and also your courage. I think it's wonderful. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Carol, and thank you for the amazing program and all of the wonderful women you're going to help on their pathway.